Good day to everyone. My name is Yusa, and today I will be talking about the human rights violation in Malaysia. More specifically speaking, the violation of the freedom of speech in Malaysia. Today I will be investigating the factors regarding this issue, which mainly constitute of social, historical, and political factors regarding this issue, as well as how it is possible to solve it. Now, a brief summary before, or rather an introduction before I go into this video, which will now be followed. To begin, we must first of all understand what a human rights violation is. A human rights violation is simply a violation of your human rights. For instance, your right to live, right to freedom of speech, etc. Over here, we will be dealing specifically with the violation against the freedom of speech. Now, this can come in many forms, such as state censorship, sanctions on what may be distributed among the populace, tight control on the media, and perhaps altered news, or maybe even the suppression of certain thoughts. Now, today we are dealing here specifically with the violation of the freedom of speech in Malaysia, which has happened countless of times and can be traced back to 1948, around the time of the Malayan emergency. To begin with, we have to know some historical factors regarding this human rights violation in Malaysia. To start off, we need to go back to 1948, where the Sedition Act of 1948 was passed. Now, what was the Sedition Act of 1948? Well, the Sedition Act of 1948 was a law that was enacted as a way to curb communist forces, or to curb communism in Malaya, but mostly so that the government could have more powers in arresting people or detaining people who were dissidents of the government of the Federated Malay States, which was a colony of Great Britain. Now, a further explanation into the Sedition Act of 1948. In Section 3 of the Sedition Act of 1948, it states that it is illegal to bring hatred or contempt or to excite dissatisfaction against any ruler or against any government. However, this violates Section 10A of the Malaysian Constitution, which states that every citizen has the right to freedom of speech and expression. Notice how this law violates the Constitution? Now, another thing to note, this law was enacted in 1948, which was during the era of the Federated Malay States, while the Malaysian Constitution was enacted during 1957. Notice here how this law shouldn't even be here, the Sedition Act of 1948. Now, further explanation. So, a further explanation as to why the British kept this law. This was in order to help rebuild post-war Britain after World War II, but this was increasingly difficult day by day. So, it was decided that Barisan Nasional, or the Alliance Party as it was known in the past, would gain power under the condition that business interests would be protected in Malaysia. But how did you do this without the Malaysian people knowing? It's very simple, really. Just keep the Sedition Act of 1948, because you still have to know the Malayan emergency was still going on. It would not be halted until the 1960s. And as a further precaution, they divided the people racially. In this section, I will combine the social and political factors regarding this human rights violation in Malaysia, that is, the violation against the freedom of speech in Malaysia. Since both factors are similar and would require both to be merged for a better explanation. To begin, Malaysia has been dominated by a pro-Malay political party since 1957, with the Alliance Party, now Barisan Nasional, being the head of the Malaysian government since 1957 till today. To begin, Malaysia has always been a Malay-dominated country up till the 1900s, where the Chinese started flooding in to take up work opportunities that the British offered to work on the tin mines and the rubber plantation estates. However, this is where tensions began to rise. You see, the British paid the Chinese very lowly, but the Chinese were willing to work for low wages, which meant that they could be used as cheap labor. However, the Chinese started to take opportunities of this and started to own these tin mines and rubber estates. So these Malays started to view the Chinese as the rich imperialists, same like the British, and the Chinese started to view the Malays as lazy men of the British. This tension lasted even until today, and Barisan Nasional took advantage of this to secure their power. How did they did this? Well, it's very simple. You see, if you have heard earlier in this video, I have talked about the Sedition Act of 1948. This was around the time of the Malayan emergency. Now, this was where the Malays started to get more suspicious of the Chinese, since most of the Malayan Communist Party members who staged the Malayan emergency were Chinese. Most of them were Chinese. Some examples of Malay members include Abdullah Sidi, who was the senior leader of the Malayan Communist Party. So, the British government, colonial, and the Alliance Party, now Barisan Nasional, took advantage of this. So, it went a little bit something like this. The Chinese are the communists. They are our enemies. We need to unite and fight against them. Well, they did not exactly say this, but this was how they took advantage. They easily believed this, and that was how the control started. And this was how this party has kept in power, by turning one race against each other. Perhaps when looking at social factors regarding this human rights violation in Malaysia, we should not focus on the past directly, but also on recent events. And I believe the May 13th incident in Malaysia during the 1960s was one of them. You see, this was around the time where Barisan Nasional, the dominating party at the time, actually lost a majority of votes in parliament. The opposition party then decided to lead a victory parade. And then the winning party decided to also hold a victory parade. That was when the tension started. You see, both sides were angry at each other because, number one, the winning party lost a majority of seats, and number two, there were the perhaps party, the opposition party, that managed to gain more seats in parliament, were angry that the opposition to them, which would be Barisan Nasional, would actually counter them with a different parade. So that's when the tensions started to happen, to the point that riots broke out, deaths were caused. You see, the Malaysian government then declared martial law for a certain period, which I think consolidated our power. it was also around this time where a basic government in Malaysia was instilled. Parliament was suspended, but the Malaysian government was still in control after this martial law was lifted. You see, this is how the Malaysian government itself takes advantage of this, takes advantage of this situation. They take a racial conflict because their government is specifically speaking pro-Malay. They take this and use it in their own power to hold on to their power, which is pretty much a further explanation of the social factors regarding to this issue. In a brief summary, this human rights violation in Malaysia is caused not only by historical factors, but also social and political factors, which have contributed to this violation over the many years, starting from 1948. So far, almost every significant action to end this issue has only failed with little success, although it at times has gained international criticism and recognition. I believe the main barrier to solving this issue is not repealing the Sedition Act of 1948 itself, for that alone will not help, but looking at the faults of Malaysian society and first solving them. Generally speaking, Malaysian society is conservative. Its citizens rarely question the power of the state and authority, and anyone that does is usually shunned out. But if they actually do speak out, generally does so in a manner that doesn't work, meaning that change is rare in a country like Malaysia for its conservatism. For instance, the political rallies, Bersih Rally 1 to 5, were merely peaceful protests, although I would have to say that some of the protests earlier were not peaceful. However, the protests simply didn't work and more control was implemented on the people. You see, the problem to solving this human rights issue, this violation against the freedom of speech, is to actually stop giving the government a reason to withhold the freedom of speech from the people. You need to end the conflict between the Malays and the Chinese. Because if you do not resolve this strained relationship, as well as instilling a backbone, which is a sort of a way for Malaysian society to stand against this violation, only then will this human rights violation be repealed, and only will the Sedition Act of 1948 being removed would be of use. And hopefully this violation of freedom of speech would end. I thank all of you for watching this video, and I hope that you have learned something from it. Thank you for watching again. I shall see you next time.